Cliff Hudson, you were the CEO and chairman of Sonic Corporation, which is a fast food chain in the United States. And according to Wikipedia, your business grew, or the franchise grew from 1,428 locations to over 3,500 locations. And under your leadership, the business grew from $200 million to $2.3 billion. So that's a spectacular growth. And now, like a second ad, you just wrote a book called Master of None, How a Jack of All Trades Can Still Reach the Top. Clifford, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elaine. Very nice to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So I've been reading your book from your childhood, from the time that some little kid beat you in the butt to the time to the time that you went to high school, and then there was this desegregation going on and all this turmoil, and then the growth of Sonic Corporation to your present state of life. So this is an amazing story. Can we start by maybe going back to high school when you were trying to figure out what to do with your life?
So, as with most people in the States, I began high school 14 years old. So 14, 15 is a common point. And, I think as with most people that age, really wasn't sure what I want to do with my life, although there are two things on a parallel path that did develop for me as a high school student that were significant determining factors. One, the opportunity to more significantly develop leadership skills, which is very much the subject of my book. And then the second was many men that, and it really was many men that I knew in the community were lawyers, and they either practiced law or they had law degrees when they went into business. They had law degrees that went into politics or government. And it struck me at 15, 16 years old that a path that included legal studies would be a good path for me. And I should say these people that I saw that had law degrees, I admired them. And they seemed to have interesting lives and varied lives. So I would say these are two things that in those years that had a significant impact on developing what kind of track I wanted to be on. Now, there's another, as you know, there's another track in the book. It's not a track, it's a value system and a philosophy that I developed more in high school. Before going to high school, I had always attended segregated schools, all white schools. And high school was the first period of time I had where I attended school with, at that time, the primary mix would have been Caucasians and African Americans. So this was a tremendous growth experience for me, and one that gave me, I think, a very different value set in terms of inclusion of diverse populations and the benefit in life, but the benefit to any organization of having diverse populations involved in your, if you want to say, in your enterprise, in your organization, or you want to say in your life. There's a great benefit to that.
But I know, I mean, that happens in the late 60s. I know that the segregation was not popular in Oklahoma, yet you and your family were supporters of this desegregation. How did that make you feel to be in an all-white school and all of a sudden being sit next to a black kid? Did you feel threatened, frightened? What was your emotion, and what was kind of the media around you? Because there was a lot of fear mongering at that time as well. They were trying to influence how you will receive that classmate next to you.
Right. Well, I think as it relates to how I felt about any individual, I think I approached the experience pretty wide open. And there were experiences, as you will see when you read the book, if you haven't already. There was a lot of tension, even some fighting and fair to say, some violence. And that was the fighting wasn't new to me. I'd seen kids fist fight, and I'd been involved in fist fights as a kid. What was unusual was to see it rise to such a level of real physical danger, and this was quite new in my life, and not a positive thing. But as it relates to attending class and sitting with students of diverse backgrounds, I have to say on an individual basis, no, my reaction was not one of fear or resentment or concern. I developed friendships with many people, and as you can see in the book, as I talk about developing leadership skills through high school, really became good friends and strong, affiliations, you might say, with kids of diverse backgrounds, and was selected by them in student leadership positions because of that. So this was, part of that growing experience, but it also influenced me later in life to ensure I had that kind of diversity in the workplace and diversity in my life.
Do you feel like as a society we are moving forward in regards to eliminating or reducing racism? I mean, we still see it every day in the news. Uh, Black people being assassinated practically in front of live cameras.
Yeah, this is a real problem, and it's a real challenge. Um, in the United States, the criminal justice system literally seems to me um, all the way from laws that are on the books to how we treat people on the streets, how we treat them administratively in our judicial system, how we the rates of imprisonment, etc. The United States has a serious problem there. It's not new. It's not new. It is. I mean, it's in some ways it's hundreds of years old. But I think we really need some far more serious, open discussion about the challenges that we have in the United States, and attempts at remedying this. There's some discussion of that sort going on. It's not as the recognition of how systemic the problem is. I don't think the recognition is not great, and there are, of course, some elements of the population who don't see it as a problem. They see it as a path that we should be on. But I think most people, from conversations I have, from looking at polls, et cetera, surveys of people, I think most people recognize that our race problems are a challenge for our country, and that I think, bluntly, having Donald Trump as president and conducting himself the way he has probably brings the awareness of those problems
Wow.
much. The awareness is greater than it was 4 years ago.
Right. Okay. So here you are. You are in high school. You decide to become a lawyer, and then how that developed to you going to law school, and then uh, started to work at Sonic.
Yep. To my surprise, in law school, I actually enjoyed business law, and I didn't go to law school thinking I would. I really didn't know what I'd do with a law degree. I thought I'd study law and then find out. Mine may have been a little bit more up in the air than some people, but I think that's true for a lot of people that go to law school to find out, do they like trial work, do they like business work, do they like regulatory work, et cetera. At any rate, I enjoyed business law and ended up several years in private practice with business law practice, first on the East Coast, and then my wife and I returned to this region of the country because the economy had been very hot for several years with an oil boom of the late 70s, early 80s. So we returned to this region, and I figured I'd kind of ride the upward swing, except that a few months after we moved back here, an oil bust occurred, and in the region, things were quite depressed for quite a while. So I continued in private law practice for a couple of years, but I didn't see that being on a good path, and and locally because of the tough economy, and businesses were failing left and right. So my perspective was, if I wanted to continue in a business law setting, I might need to leave the region or join a company that where I'd have a single client, in essence. So I had a former neighbor that was an officer of Sonic. In fact, I was pursuing him, trying to get business from the firm I was employed by, and instead he kind of turned the tables. It was kind of clever on his part. He said, "We've got a new CEO. Why don't you meet the new CEO?" I thought, well, this is great. As a potential client, I'm going to meet the new CEO. And so I did. And then, the more we talked, the more, as I said, they turned the tables and said, "Why don't you come inside and be our in-house counsel, so to speak?" So at 29 years old, I became general counsel of Sonic. It's a pretty young age to do that, but that's how I got into the business, and it just took its own path, part of which I describe in the book, took its own path over time.
And then you became a CEO eventually. But for a person who writes a book called Master of None, you stayed as a CEO for what, 11 years?
Well, I was CEO for 23 years.
23 years.
Yeah,
That's
I was with the company for 11 years before I became CEO,
yeah,
and then
that's what I
and
have in my notes. Yes.
and then once I became CEO, I was CEO for 23 years. But in that time, I mean, the company went through a pretty radical transformation. The system, franchise system, the whole system went from 800 million or so in sales to 4.5 billion. And as you pointed out at the outset of the program, the value of the company went from 200 million to 2.3 billion. So it was a huge change over that time. But yes, 11 years with the company before I became CEO, and then I ran the company for 23 years.
Wow. Okay. I will come back to this in a second, but how does it feel? I mean, it's a huge company, but by comparison, it's a small company when we think of Burger King and McDonald's. I mean, with huge advertising budget, how does it feel to compete against these huge companies?
Well, that was always a challenge, and every month that was the question we had to answer. So the the key here, I think, for any company like that is not competing primarily on price. The key is trying to compete on differentiation, and in our case, that was both product and service differentiation. And for us, what did that mean? Well, some of the products were different than McDonald's or Burger King had, like freshly breaded onion rings, a huge variety of drinks, and so on. But the other point was 100% of the food was made to order, and we could regularly make that. And our competitors had warming bins, and they had the food prepared when you came in. And they grabbed it off the shelf and gave it to you. So we always, with investors anyway, I would say, look, with our competitors, the customer is coincidental to the business. But in our business, the customer actually drives the business.
Right.
The customer is everything. So this was the differentiation that we drove for years, and it seemed to work pretty well. I mean, the average store sales exploded, the average store profit exploded, the system grew dramatically, as we described, and I think did a pretty good job at differentiating our business versus our competition on a much smaller budget.
Wow. Okay. So you have the book Master of None, and then I have been reading economics books for a long time. I read Adam Smith Wealth of Nation, where he talks about specialization and the division of labor, and then Henry Ford with his assembly line, how telling us how we should specialize and just turning that knob and do it 8 hours a day. And Henry Ford, for example, was able to grow his business spectacularly, and all his employee went from, I don't know, less than $1 a day to $5 a day. But now you are telling us something else. You are telling us that we shouldn't specialize, that we should be kind of master of everything. I mean, what is it? Well, you know what I mean. Jack of all trades. Yes. So help me understand these two opposite point of views.
Well, I think the question for in any of these circumstances is, what is your circumstance? If a person wants to become a brain surgeon, then there are several things you better consider. One is you better specialize quite considerably, and two, you better focus on it and work and work and work to develop your specialty. But not too many of us are going to become brain surgeons. And so I think it's point number one: what is your circumstance in terms of the path you want to be on? Two, what are your relative skill sets and kind of natural tendency? But three, what's the moment in time? And you described two circumstances with Adam Smith and Henry Ford. There were very different point in time for the economies of the Western world, or Scotland in one case, the United States in the other. A very different point in time, and one in which a production line mechanization as it related to production of automobiles, as an example, was a totally different point in time versus where we are today. And when you look at the nature of the economy today, and particularly as it relates to service industries, which now make up a much larger portion of the economy than they did 100 years ago, or really even 50 or 60 years ago, the likelihood of in a service industry, the likelihood of technology, as an example, affecting how you do your job and what you need to know about your job, or whether your job even exists within a few years, is so considerable. The likelihood of it having that kind of impact is so great that, from my viewpoint, what we really need, most employers, unless you are a production line, unless you are highly mechanized, et cetera, but what most employers need is creative thinkers who have good analytical skills and good work ethic, and depending on your business, a passion for your enterprise, where they'll jump in with you and drive it forward. But they have flexible mindsets and creative heads where they can help you evolve and grow your business. So this is the experience I had in the 35 years with one company of creative thinking about how to grow the brand. And as you said a moment ago, you're talking about how do you differentiate versus the McDonald's and Burger King. I mean, this is, you don't do it just by, making a bigger burger or a cheaper burger. You got to think about it very differently.
Right. Okay. But this creative thinking idea, which I agree with you, but I feel like that it applies to the top level management, because there has to be kind of a army of people who will follow the guidance or the vision of the CEO.
Well, to some degree that's accurate. When I think about my job for many years as CEO, um, my number one job was strategic planning for the organization, and that is a creative thinking process. The implementation skills, periodically, I had took some responsibility for implementation, meeting with operators and selling in new initiatives or something. But by and large, my direct reports and their subordinates took the responsibility for implementation. So the point you just made, my job in that setting was one. It supports your point, but it's almost an extreme example of that point. But the fact is, even if you go down into the organization, in my case, running a franchise organization, the number one service we provided to our operators was marketing and brand strategy. Mm-hmm. Now, there were some other things too, but we had a large marketing team inside and outside of a variety of sorts. So there were a lot of people without the title of CEO, some without officer titles. They were very involved in creative thinking about how to drive the business forward. Right. Whether it was new products, new television creative, new uses of media, new day part extensions, whatever it was. There were all kinds of people in our organization and outside required to think about that, whose title was not CEO.
Right. Okay. But still, wouldn't you want your cashier to be an expert, to kind of click all those numbers practically without thinking, and the guy flipping the hamburgers, if that's such a thing, to be able to know exactly when to turn that hamburger at what temperature and when to take it off and put it in the buns. Probably what I'm thinking of is that I guess the higher the level in a corporation or business or organization, the more that you would like to be a jack of all trades, but at one moment someone has to be specialized in something in order to succeed, no?
Well, a couple of reactions to that. One, um, in most of our restaurants, most of the Sonic restaurants, the person that could flip the burgers, you could say, could also move into other areas of the business
Mm.
and perform other functions. So, in that sense, the most experienced and valuable employee was one that was a jack of all trades from an operations standpoint. That's point number one. Point number two, your comment about the cashier makes um, a big makes a big point, believe it or not, about the application of technology. Um, and what am I referring to there? Two quick examples. One, back in 2002, 2003. So Sonic, some of your listeners probably have not been to a Sonic before. So Sonic is a drive-in restaurant concept, a 50s style drive-in restaurant concept. So the customer pulls in their car and pulls into a parking stall, orders, and then waits for the food to be made. Well, 0102, one of the things we experimented with was um, attaching credit card readers to the menu housing. Now, today, maybe that's obvious. 20 years ago, it wasn't obvious. Um, and 95% of our sales were cash. Now, one of the skill sets that a car hop, the person who took the food to the customer, one of the skill sets they had to have was to carry a changer on their belt, and they needed to be able to count up quickly, very quickly, literally clicking the coin changer and grabbing their bills and change. Well, we did attach a credit card reader to those stalls, 0203, and in the next 15 years until our company was acquired in 2018, 100% of the growth was in credit card sales.
Wow.
Now, that one, it was a great innovation, but two, what it showed was a decreasing reliance on people having to, unfortunately, do math and make change. Now, the extension of that now is the last initiative I put in place, literally in the year the company was bought, was to have a mobile app that integrated with the
Mm.
systems inside the store and also the iPad sort of set up in the parking stall. So a customer could order off premises and pay off premises. My impression right now in this pandemic is the mobile order, mobile pay. So now to the extent you have mobile order, mobile pay, the employee inside the drive-in that used to take the order, it's now about 15% of the orders. They don't even have to take them, and nor do they have to make change, because when they take the customer the food, it's already been paid for. It was ordered over the app, paid for over the app, and it simply appears on the screen inside the drive-in. They make the food, they take it out and hand it to the customer. So the need for these employees to have different, to be a jack of all trades, even applies there.
Right.
Because of the shifting use of technology in those examples, that has made their jobs different, and that will grow. Meaning that
Wow.
the portion about mobile order, mobile pay, that's only going to grow. It's perhaps 15% of sales now, maybe a little less, but it'll grow substantially over time, and making change will be even less of a big deal.
Okay, well, Clifford, then your company, I mean, Sonic gets acquired. You are no longer the CEO. I don't know if you are retired or not, but then you decide to write this book. Uh, can you tell us why you thought writing this book was necessary?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is in terms of what I'm doing day to day. I'm not running another company at this point, and don't really intend to pursue that. I'm kind of enjoying where I am. I thought it would be good to write the book. One, because I thought there were some interesting stories to tell about Sonic and about my life. and some things that influenced me, as we were talking about earlier in your show. Um, so, one, I thought there were some interesting points to make. Um, and two, I felt like the nature of the leadership, the way my leadership skills developed as a young person and then running a franchise organization were very different from some other people's leadership skills. And it was a story that was worth telling about that style of leadership, meaning a high degree of collaboration and engagement of people at all levels.
Okay, let's say I'm 17 years old and I read this book. Okay, and now you confuse me because all my life someone have been telling me that I had to become, let's say, a doctor or an engineer. Now you're telling me to become jack of all trades. So, what would you tell me if I'm a 17-year-old kid right there in Oklahoma trying to
Yeah.
decide what to do with my life? What would you tell me?
Well, first thing I'd tell someone is to try to zero in on what it is that they enjoy. And because you're generally only going to be good at something if you like it, you know, and so trying to figure out what your passion is, and maybe a little bit of an overused word, but what it is that you enjoy, what clicks. You know, you can ask a young person, what clicks for you? What feels right when you're engaged in that activity? And they may say sports feels good or sports doesn't feel good. Reading feels fantastic. You know, the mechanics of math doesn't work for me. You know, whatever it is. And in my case, I had enjoyed history for years. I ended up studying history in college. I could have said, "Gee, I need to pursue something that will get me a job," you know, a more mechanical sort of pursuit. But I didn't. My reaction was, "I'm going to go to college. I will get a degree, and I will study what I enjoy," which in my case was history. Now, if a young person thinks that they want to become a doctor, then the best thing to do is prepare along that path, and that's going to have a prescribed course of study and other preparation, professional preparation. But it seems to be the last thing a young person should do is think of a career development as though it's a dartboard, and you aim for something that has nothing to do with your passion. What you really should do is figure out what you believe you're somewhat naturally good at, intuitively good at, and that will align with what you enjoy.
Right.
And then develop develop along that path and let life happen. And if you're an area where you are feeling good about it, i.e., you like it and you're excelling, you know, life will develop in a positive way, and you got to let it develop.
Right. Okay. And I also noticed that you have a podcast. Can you tell us just two words about what is your podcast about and the name?
Well, the name of the podcast is the same as the main title of the book, Master of None. So the book has the subtitle, How a Jack of All Trades Can Still Reach the Top. And that really was more about my career, but some parallel stories out there in the world that I felt like supported the elements of how I approached my career. On the other hand, the podcast, while having the same name, Master of None, is really about other people's lives and interviewing people on themes that, from my viewpoint, reinforce the themes of the book.
Right.
And so, literally, a listener to the podcast will find of the individual podcast that arise. They're literally chapters of the book, like just say yes, or
Right.
innovation is not a luxury. You know, and these are other people's experiences that I think really reinforce these themes.
Okay, Clifford, the last question. Your book was released just a few days where we can find it, and just one more time, repeat the title of the book.
Okay. Well, probably the easiest place to find it is on Amazon. There are quite a few booksellers. If you want to go to my website, which is cliffordhudson.com, you can go to the website and it will lead you to, 12, 15 different booksellers that are handling the book, cliffordhudson.com. And the name of the book is Master of None, How a Jack of All Trades Can Still Reach the Top.
Clifford, thank you so much for your time.
Elaine, thank you. I enjoyed it very much.